Hi everyone, if you're new to my channel, I am Sam and I make videos about autism and neurodiversity here on YouTube every single week. If you think you might like that kind of thing, please hit the subscribe button and the little notification bell next to it so you get a notification every time I post a new video. Now there are many people, and healthcare professionals, that still believe that autism has a certain look to it. This is generally based on outdated stereotypes, perpetuated by the media and research that only focuses on children, for example. But recently, our understanding of autism has broadened in light of the realization that many autistic people can and do mask their autism, sometimes to the point where they seem indistinguishable from their neurotypical peers. So what is masking? Masking essentially refers to an active attempt to conceal your true autistic nature or your real self. There are a variety of ways in which somebody might do this, and different people might use different methods, and some might use all of them and some might use just one. And some autistic people mask heavily and some don't mask at all, which is why they look autistic. A really great research article came out recently which attempted to measure so-called compensatory strategies for the first time. I mean, can you believe it? It's 2020 and we're only just researching this now. Anyway, it's a really great paper and I will link it below, but I've taken out the good bits for this video, I'd say. So they actually call masking compensatory strategies, and they identified 4 categories. So we call masking in a more general term, but this is what they call it, and for a very good reason, because their first category is masking, which is confusing, I think. But their definition of masking is specifically hiding aspects of yourself. So it's kind of like dampening your autistic behaviors, like stimming, constantly holding back your thoughts and opinions when you're in a social setting, and essentially blending in with a group. And I do this a lot actually. If I'm in a group setting, I'm often really quiet, and then I kind of like interject only when I've kind of thought about what I want to say, but it's not a natural process. It's much easier for me to just shrink back into the group and not draw attention to myself. And this strategy is quite low impact energy-wise. You know, it doesn't take a lot of energy to do. It's very easy to sit there and let the group sort of wash over you. But it often leads people to assume that I am shy and that I am much more introverted than I actually am. So the next category that they identified is called shallow compensation. And this is sort of like the basics: copying people, making eye contact, learning and enacting social scripts and social rules and body language and things that don't come naturally to us, but come as a result of sort of studying other people, kind of like an anthropologist would, and trying to mimic the social norms on a basic behavioral level. How do they greet each other, for example? And I'm personally one of those people that finds greetings really stressful, especially here in the Netherlands, where the standard greeting for people that you've met more than like once is 3 cheek kisses. And it's really awkward because I don't like being kissed by people I don't know, even if I've met them once. That's not like... And also, when you're in an international environment and you have a lot of different people around, you never really know what to do. And I know in the UK, and possibly in America, this is also true because there is no set social script. So you have to like be up to date with what's going on, and this can result in like quite a few awkward encounters. But shallow compensation is basically studying others to figure out how to make these interactions go more smoothly, even though you don't really get it, you might not like it, and basically just want to run away from the whole thing. But it's the very basics, like the scripts, the interactions, the greetings, the body language. That is shallow compensation. So the third category they called deep compensation, which, as you can imagine, goes a little bit deeper than that. And this is something that I think I started doing from about my late teens to early 20s, or maybe mid to late teens to early 20s, through my 20s in fact. Obviously I study psychology, which in hindsight seems like a desperate cry to understand people. And apparently it's not that uncommon for autistic people to be interested in psychology for that very reason. So deep compensation, as the name suggests, is a much deeper way to compensate for a difference, but also, as the name suggests, it is still a compensation. If you're talking about cognitive struggles, like maybe theory of mind, you might start out as an early teen with poor theory of mind, but through a practiced and somewhat intellectual approach, you might learn to build on the skill and it might be in a different way than what comes naturally to neurotypical people, who would also be learning social skills during this time. But for autistic people that are deeply compensating, or the deep compensation, it is something that is much more of a measured attempt to do it, and an intellectual attempt rather than a natural kind of social attempt. So for example, when I was a teenager, I loved watching certain TV shows, especially like the teen shows of the 90s and early 2000s, that for some reason had a load of emotional depth to them. Yeah, we're talking about Buffy again, aren't we? Let me know if you want me to do a video on my special interest of Buffy as a teenager. I say as a teenager, as a 20-something, as a 30-something. But when I watched these shows, I would analyse them with an interest that was way more than just like a casual viewer, and it was more casual because it was providing me with a social education in some ways, and insight into people and social skills and expectations and the inner life of others that I wasn't able to do in the real world because I could barely get past the sort of shallow compensation. I was still learning these social scripts, and it felt like I could never really get to the deeper part, even though I did have friends. I'm talking about the general social interactions with like wider groups of people and my peers at school and things like that. So I watched these TV shows like an anthropologist would, basically, and that's how I learned about people. But according to the researchers, this can actually provoke a genuine improvement in things like theory of mind, and even though the route to getting there isn't the same. And I wonder if that is what eventually happened to me, that I worked so hard at trying to understand people that I actually do now. And sometimes I think my pattern recognition and these sort of heuristics that I've learnt work a little bit too well, and so sometimes I can understand people a little bit deeper than maybe they would have expected, and I can figure things out about people which tends to unnerve them. And so I think this exacerbates this feeling of like uncanny valley. I talked about this in another video called Why Autistic People Seem Weird or something like that, which I will link below. It's got this thumbnail. So I talked about how autistic people kind of like are in the uncanny valley where it's like something's not quite right, but people can't figure out why. And I think for me, this is one of the reasons why I make people uncomfortable, because like I make very kind of shrewd observations about them, because that's how I learned how to understand people, and then it goes a bit far and it freaks them out. So the final strategy that they talk about in their paper is accommodation. And this basically means you've changed your life in some way to accommodate your own needs, probably without realizing it, to accommodate your weaknesses or differences or whatever, so it doesn't seem so noticeable to others or even to yourself. And they actually cited the example, which I feel a little bit personally attacked by, of moving abroad so that social differences don't seem so big. And they're attributed to being foreign rather than being autistic, you know, foreign in a different way maybe. And this hit home a little bit too much, because I actually remember talking to my husband after we moved to the Netherlands and saying like, now I'm in the Netherlands, I can just be weird and people will just think I'm British. But of course that doesn't make me any less autistic, it just means I have changed my environment so that the difference between me and everybody else is explained by something else. And do you know what, it is actually somehow less difficult being totally different in another country than being a little bit different in your own country. Somehow it's easier. Other accommodation strategies might be picking a job or career that allows you plenty of alone time, or working from home, or has fewer social obligations attached to it, or suits any of your other sensory needs. And you might have picked these out without even realizing that you were making the accommodations that you needed. So you just think, I really like working from home because I like my environment, and you never even think of that as an autistic accommodation, but it is. And of course, accommodation isn't a bad thing. These compensatory strategies can actually be good. And they suggest that accommodation in particular might be good for autistic mental health, which kind of makes sense actually. But it might work to hide or obscure autistic traits from others, possibly leading to a harder pathway to diagnosis, or you don't get diagnosed until, you know, you're later in life, in your 30s, 40s, 50s, or beyond. And the conclusions of the research seem to indicate that there was no correlation between compensatory strategies and age diagnosis. But that is definitely interesting further research, because this is one of the first studies that's been done on masking. So I really think that this is a very interesting direction to take autism research. And there might be even autistic subtypes that compensate in different ways. I mean, well, no, we just got rid of that in the last DSM, but you know, we might be able to discover valid autistic subtypes Obviously, not all autistic people are the same, you know. It's a spectrum. But just from my sort of anthropological point of view, spending time with autistic people online and in real life, you can see that there are subgroups, and I don't quite know how to explain them, but I think that would be so interesting for future research. So these are the 4 types of compensatory strategies that work together to form the autistic mask. And for some of us, that has taken decades to construct. And it is basically our model of how to be a human being, how to live in this world. And then you get diagnosed and you realize you've been masking, but then what? And all of these strategies, in a way, do work to hide your autistic self in different ways. And the question is, can you just stop doing these things and live a life as you were supposed to do? Or have they actually become an intrinsic part of who you are, at least on a social level? I mean, if you suddenly stop using all these strategies, at least in a social settings, it's probably not going to go very well for you. And communication in a social way, whether verbal or non-verbal, it exists kind of like in a vacuum. If you take away the learned parts, you have to replace it with something else, otherwise you're not communicating, you're just sitting there. So really the question is, when you take all of that away, all of the stuff you've learned, what is there left to replace it with? What comes naturally? And should you even trust what comes naturally? And should you even stop doing these things? Now, there's a YouTube channel called Asperger's on the Inside, and he has a great video on this. I highly recommend checking it out after this one, because it goes into more details of the pros and cons of masking versus being yourself. And of course, it is linked down below. Now, in general, this is a very difficult question to answer, obviously. I don't think we should tell autistic people what to do. Even other autistic people, I'm not going to tell anyone, you should take the mask off. No, you should keep the mask on in this situation. Like, I can't advise anyone on that. It's completely dependent on your situation. But if we find fulfillment in relationships developed with a mask, it's going to be really weird if we all of a sudden start acting differently. People might think that you are putting it on after your diagnosis, or they might feel like you've been tricking them all this time, which I can understand. And I personally think that any moves towards unmasking, if that's what you want to do, is best done slowly, with deliberation and with conversations with the people around you, explaining that you've been using all these strategies and explaining how this one might be helping you, but this one is not and takes a lot of energy. And the thing to remember is that we've developed our masks for a reason. Perhaps as a survival strategy, and along the way, growing up, when we've been sloppy and given others a glimpse behind the mask, we might have had comments like, "Why are you so weird?" or awkward silences, or being ostracized from a group, or people literally turning away because you said something wrong. That's happened to me. So in taking off the mask, you might need to really assess and have a good look at whether it continues to help you, because it might, partially. Masking might provide benefits such as enabling you to keep your job, for example, make new friends, maintain relationships with others, and feeling like you belong and have a place in the world. And I don't even know how exactly I would be if I stopped using these strategies that I've learned. For me, it got to the point, after I became a mother, that the shallow compensation, the small talk, making the right facial expressions and this kind of thing, the sort of acting out the part of being yourself, that all suddenly became really exhausting, and I only then realized how much energy I'd been putting into it. It's extremely energy intensive. And this is something that I'm not just going to drop, but it did make me take, especially at the time, a few great big steps back from socializing. And the problem is, I've realized now that I'm actually kind of an extrovert. But it got to the point where I didn't have the energy to act anymore, and without that energy I found myself getting increasingly anxious in social situations because I was keenly aware of how autistic I was being. And because I am recently diagnosed and extremely conscious of my own behavior now, everything I do seemed to have this little yo Samdy Sam whispering in my ear going, "That's very autistic, I wonder if they noticed." And it's difficult. It's really difficult. And I don't want you to think that I've got it all together, because taking off the mask has been a process for me, and it's been over a year since my diagnosis, and I'm still not at the point where I've figured it all out. And I don't think I took the mask off exactly. I don't think I just, ripped it off. Ooh. I don't think I just ripped it off to, reveal my flesh underneath. But I tried to take the pressure off. I tried to take the pressure off myself to be this person that I know that they want me to be. That's a Frozen quote, right? But I started really by looking at the friends who were understanding and wouldn't care if I was slightly more awkward in their company. Of course, spending more time with autistic people has been extremely nourishing for my freshly diagnosed soul. You know, you don't have to take the mask off completely. Even around autistic people, you don't. But you can just loosen the strings a little bit, so it's a bit more comfortable, test the waters, and experiment with being yourself in a more authentic way that is less energy intensive, that leaves you less prone to feeling depressed and like people don't understand your true self. As a teenager, I was really conscious about stimming. Even though I didn't do it a lot, I did it enough that occasionally people would notice. And every time somebody noticed a stim that I was doing, like I used to roll on my ankles a lot, I used to chew the inside of my cheek a lot, I would stop doing it the minute somebody pointed it out, and I would find something else to do that was more subtle. And this even was if I noticed somebody else was stimming and somebody made fun of them, even if it wasn't directed at me, I would make note of that, saying, oh, that's weird, that's noticeable, don't do that. And so I was really hyper aware of the social order around me, and yet unable to participate in it without active effort and suppression of who I really was, and stimming, which was sort of a stress release or emotional regulation tool. So taking it away really leads to a build-up of stress, and since my diagnosis I have been reflecting on this and actively finding ways to stim in a positive, non-self-destructive way, but also in a more socially acceptable way. So I can do something, it makes me feel good, but doing it doesn't make other people uncomfortable. And so for me, exploring stim toys has been quite positive so far. I now really do enjoy using the thinking putty, which is basically like the blue tack that I used to obsessively play with, roll, squeeze, and even sometimes chew on. And so the thinking putty is kind of like a socially acceptable version of that, not like, why are you being strange playing with blue tack? It's slightly more socially acceptable, I think. So this active stimming is actually really helping me, especially if I can find ways that don't draw too much attention to myself, because I'm still pretty self-conscious in public, and I don't like getting strange looks because I've had my share of them. So when I remember, for example, I'll put like my little fidget block in my pocket, and then I can play with that as I'm going around or something, and that is a very subtle way to kind of work off the extra hand and finger energy. I will wear hair ties around my wrist that are really good for sort of like, you know, people wear elastic bands, but I hate wearing elastic bands for pinging myself, so I wear the hair ties. And I've also started embracing a bit of hand flapping, which is something that I don't remember ever doing as a child, probably because I was aware that that would be a big no-no. But I do it at home, and I've found when I'm anxious, just doing a bit of this really, really helps. And so I'm hoping that by doing it at home, then if I need to when I'm out and about, my body will know what to do, or something like that. It feels very silly and a bit artificial in some ways to actively look for new stims, but I have found that it does help me regulate myself better, and that is one way that I'm really like taking off the mask, and I'm trying to be positive and be active in that process. And of course, now I have a YouTube channel about autism. Public stimming is somewhat, you know, on brand, so that actually does help. But the really essential question that we're asking here is, if you do decide that you want to be your true, authentic, unicorn self, who are you under all that? Are you the person that you have constructed? Are you the person that you have made because that's who you think people wanted you to be? And I'm afraid I don't have answers. But I do think that there are ways that you can work this out for yourself. It does take time and effort. Boo! So things you can do include therapy, which is great, but obviously not affordable to a lot of people. You can do journaling. You can try meditation if you can bear it. I find it excessively boring, but maybe there's a little ADHD there somewhere. Talking to other autistic people is a great way of figuring out who you are. Asking your friends and family how they would describe you, what adjectives they might use, because sometimes other people have a really different perspective on us than we have on ourselves. And especially family or people who know you really, really well, that you might be a little bit more unmasked with. They might be able to say, well, yeah, you act like this in public or with people you don't know very well, but with us, this is who you are. And so that can give you a little bit more insight. But it takes time to work out what is just an illusion of self and what is true. But maybe that's not even the right question. I mean, is life not one big illusion anyway? we might all be in a simulation. We have no concept of what is real and what is real life and that sort of stuff. And I promise that I have not been smoking anything. What is real life? I think that's the second time I made this joke on a video. But you know, one of the hardest things for me to come to terms with since my diagnosis is that before I was diagnosed with autism and before I had any concept that I might be autistic, I saw myself as quite unique and different and quirky and all these things, and I was like, I'm quite special, aren't I? I'm not like everybody else. But since meeting other autistic people online and in real life, it turns out I'm not that unique or quirky or special. I'm just like other autistic people, actually, and this is humbling, but you know what? It's also kind of a relief, and sometimes a bit of humble feels good. So I really want to apologise for raising more questions in this video than I can answer, and maybe can't even be answered. This was kind of like Philosophy of Autism 101. There's an interesting class. Next week we will discuss the question, if a tree falls in the wood, can the autistic person see the wood for the trees? If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit all the buttons, yeah. Apologies for my husky sore throat. Hope you liked this video, and I will see you next time. Class dismissed.